Hello, everybody. So, this is yes. So, thank you very much. I'm the president of French in Motion, who organized the screening with NYU. Thank you for staying now for the conversation after this very powerful film. Before we begin, I just really want to thank Tom McIntyre and the teams at NYU Washington and the John Brademas Center for making this event possible and for believing in democracy on screen from the very beginning. I also want to seriously thank our speakers tonight for being here, for their time, their commitment, and for bringing their experience and perspective into this room. So to help us unpack the many questions raised by Kabul chaos, we are very pleased to welcome an exceptional panel. Thank you, Nick, for being here. Nick Spicer is a journalist with NPR. He will moderate the discussion. Nick serves as Europe editor on NPR's international desk and has reported extensively on international conflicts and democratic movements. And he'll be joined by Susannah George, who is the Gulf Bureau Chief of the Washington Post, and she previously covered Afghanistan as the paper's Bureau Chief and reported on the fall of the Afghan government in 2021. And Ali Yawar Adili, he's non-resident fellow at NYU's Center on International Cooperation. He's an expert on conflict, democratization, and Afghan political institutions, and a former senior researcher based in Kabul. Welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I will. The floor is yours.
Can everybody hear us? Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed the movie. We'll come to you afterwards. Thank you to French in Motion as well at NYU for having this. This is the first in a series of documentaries and other films devoted to democracy on screen. So I hope you keep coming, and thank you for coming to the inaugural screening. We'll have questions and comments from you at the end of our chat, which will last maybe about 35, 40 minutes. Ali's got to go back to New York tonight. What did you guys think of the movie? What did it work for you? You were both, these two panelists were both there at the time. Forgot to say that.
Yeah. One of the things the movie reminded me of is during that time it was so chaotic. Depending on where you were in Kabul, you kind of had no idea what was going on even just a few blocks away. So I mean, I'd heard the stories of different groups of people holed up in different places, different embassies where people had sought refuge. The place where I was a hotel, the Hotel Serena, where there were people waiting to be evacuated from there. So it was interesting to see kind of these similar stories unfold, but from a different perspective.
And you helped bring out the Washington Post team,
right? Which
was largely Afghan.
Yes.
And you were kind of needed in the way, it's not perhaps comparable, but maybe it is, the way that the French people needed the Taliban sort of to get through, and you with the American passport could get through.
Right, yeah, I mean, it was a chaotic time, and there wasn't, a system for how to get to the airport. So the way that we were able to make it work was kind of to travel together as a team and get access to the military side of the airport then.
So but you delivered them and then went back to report for a few days, right?
Well, yeah, we all were evacuated together to Qatar, and then a few days later I came back to Afghanistan on my own to report after the rest of my colleagues got out.
And Ali, to come to you, you're an Afghan, you were working there, wife was working at the American Embassy, I believe you said?
Yes.
It must have been very hard to go through that.
Yeah, I think this movie really captures both the personal experience of the fall of Kabul and also the policy decisions that shaped all of it. On a personal level, I think two moments deeply resonated with me. One is when they are burning the documents at the embassy, and also planning for evacuation. On the morning of August, at that time I was the country director of Afghanistan Analyst Network, a research organization based in Kabul. On the morning of August 15, I went to the office and with the help of our colleagues, burned the documents, like the personal files of the colleagues, and also the contact details of our sources. We were a research organizations. We had our sources and we were in contact. We had to burn them. And by noon, after I sent everyone back home and closed the office, I walked out of the office and I found everything had unraveled. And I had to walk like from the office, which was in Khalifatullah, up to Darul Aman, which is in West Kabul. So that is one thing. And the second thing, when they are planning for evacuation, is our executive board had more meetings in the weeks leading to the fall of Kabul. And of course, until Friday, the last Friday before of the collapse, we did not have, unlike the French embassy, we did not have any evacuation plan because we were just a research organization. And Friday is a weekend in Afghanistan. On that weekend, I received a call from a senior colleague and to meet her in the office. And then we started calling all the colleagues to collect the personal details and also their families for a possible evacuations. It was just 2 days before the fall. And I think another moment that really deeply resonated with me was when activist Rada Akbar says that she had the feeling of betraying the country and the family.
I'm going to ask you that question.
And
feel betrayed.
Without any ingratitude to all those who made efforts to bring us to safety, I think the evacuation and fleeing the country was not really a sigh of relief, and it was the beginning of a new kind of pain. While we were trying to process what had happened to our country, we were all really, for many of us, tormented by the guilt of leaving our families, our country behind. I would stop here now. Sorry,
Thank you.
It always makes me emotional. Last year I was in Australia, and we were invited to to Afghan embassy in Australia, and one Australian who had served in Afghanistan showed some photos of the day Kabul fell. I really could not help myself, and I had to leave the session at that time. So.
Well, thank you for sharing these stories, and I think everybody understands that it's painful to go.
You're hard to hear.
Oh, I'm hard to hear? Thank you. I was just thanking Ali for sharing his stories, and I think we all understand the emotions are involved, inevitable. I don't know how I would go through that. You mentioned the word betrayal, and maybe I'll turn to Susannah. Was there a feeling generally, like when you, in the run-up to it all, that the people who dared to hope of a democratic Afghanistan, be they NGO workers, MPs, teachers, and so on, were being betrayed by the West?
Yeah, I mean, after I returned to Afghanistan under Taliban rule, one of the lines of reporting that we were really trying to emphasize was on the lives of women and girls. And this was at a time where, you know, access to education hadn't been completely rolled back. You know, they rolled that back. The Taliban rolled that back over the course of many months. And the young women who I spoke to, you know, they described they had access to education that their mothers didn't have. And they kind of became these evangelists for educated women to their fathers. And they kind of convinced their fathers to get on their side. And I remember I interviewed this one woman's father, and he said, you know, he didn't necessarily completely agree with it at first, but then when he saw the opportunities it gave his daughter, he was just heartbroken to then see his daughter lose those opportunities. And but one thing that did stick with me is, at least in that situation, you know, that family did feel very betrayed, but you know, they had been changed in a way that that was not something that could be taken away from them. Not like, you know, a school or a physical construction project can be destroyed or repurposed. That was one thing that gave me hope, that, you know, there is this whole generation of people, of young women who've had the opportunity to live briefly in a different reality, and they're still present in that country and still able to, you know, influence their communities.
You think there's still some, not like an underground, but
Well, we've reported there is underground education still going on. I mean, the repression is very harsh. I mean, there's you know, one of the reasons when the internet was cut, I think last year, one of the reasons that people were thinking maybe the Taliban made the decision to cut the internet was in part to cut off the access of these underground schools that were serving girls and women.
I'll come back to Ali, unless you wanted to bounce off what Susannah was saying?
No, not on this, maybe.
I was just curious, you were involved in the analyst network before the fall of Kabul. When did you feel it coming, the end? Was it like 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before? Did anybody suspect that the Taliban would just walk into the capital?
Well, I think...
or was it, if I may jump in,
yeah,
when that deal was signed in Doha under the aegis of the instigation of President Trump?
As I said, I highlighted the personal level, but the policy level, I think the movie somehow really captures that as well. If you see, there is like a decade of departure highlighted in this movie. You see President Obama at Bagram Air Base speaking, and there he says that he would bring the war in a responsible to a responsible end. And 2 years later, again in May 2024, he returns to Bagram Air Base and says that and tells the troops that it would be, for many of them, it would be their last tour. And then we have President Trump in 2009, who travels to Bagram Air Base and says that all of you are coming back home. And he says that there will be a deal. The Taliban wants a deal. And then in 2021, we have President Biden speaking from the Roosevelt Treaty Room, saying that all the forces, including the allies, will be out of Afghanistan by the 28th anniversary of 9/11. So I think this is like a decade of departure, but this decade of departure is also based on like flawed policy decisions.
May I just jump in?
Sure.
The movie kind of suggests, though, just continuing in your train of thought, that had the talks in Doha actually involved the civil society, parliamentarians, et cetera, not just the Taliban, with
that's what I want to say, that I think sometimes we see that there is a sort of partisan blaming, that whether it is President Biden's policy or President Trump's policy or President Obama's. But I think there are three decision points under three consecutive administrations in the US. In 2009, when President Obama announced his troop surge, it is a time-bound troop surge. And it sent wrong signals to the foes and friends. The Taliban started their training and regrouping, and they waited out for the withdrawal. And then when President Trump takes over, he starts the negotiation with the Taliban. Of course, he had one South Asia policy, and then after a year, there is a total turnaround. And he starts this negotiation with the Taliban, excluding the government of Afghanistan. That is really unprecedented. And then when President Biden comes to office, he does not really find some of the conditions that could be found in the agreement. He withdraws the troops unconditionally. So these are all the decision points that are, and I think what is this continuity in these policy decisions tells us, it is that the strategic calculus of the US had changed in Afghanistan was no longer, it was realigning US foreign policy to meet the big power competitions and defocusing or deprioritizing counterterrorism in Afghanistan.
And I have a kind of a trick question here for you both. How do you think historians in 50 years will look back on the day of the fall of Kabul? What will be the chapter heading? Was it the big betrayal, West pulls out? How do you think historians will explain this?
I mean, I don't know, but when I go back, I remember, I think it was, we were working on an anniversary story a few years after. And I remember going back and looking at my clips and my stories that I was writing in the weeks before the fall of Kabul. And reading my stories, I was like, how did we not know that this was going to happen? It just seemed so obvious kind of looking back. But at that time, there was a real feeling that, it would happen eventually, but it would be slow. Or even there was a lot of talk about that Kabul would be under siege for a certain number of time. People were kind of preparing, collecting water and generator fuel at their houses. And people were worried that it was going to be this long, bloody, prolonged battle, that there were going to be pitched fighting on the city's outskirts. And in a way, it was kind of good that it didn't happen that way. But I don't know, I wonder if already looking back, we're kind of realizing that maybe it shouldn't have been as much of a surprise as it was. I mean, the French seem to have gotten it right from their telling.
Ask about that maybe towards the end. How do you think that this event in the day of the fall, August 17th, I think it was, by historians in the future, what does it represent?
I think we see some sort of heroism and courage in this on this day, for example, evacuating the people, but we also the tragedies on this day. For example, it is not shown on the movie, but we had this report of a young man falling off a departing airplane on that very day. And of course, a day after I left Kabul 10 days after the fall of city on August 15. And on August 26, we had this bombing and explosion, which is captured in the movie. And it killed 170 people and 13 Americans. So this is kind of, I would be cautious because once a journalist asked me if it was a betrayal, I thought we really do not know. Betrayal makes sense if there was really a commitment.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if there was any commitment, a serious commitment to the life of Afghans, or it was only based on the strategic calculus or after 9/11.
And did the French really stand out for their? I asked this question at full disclosure. I'm half French, and this is a French-made movie. So, being a skeptical journalist, I looked up press clippings to see if it was really such a fantastic feat.
Well, I mean, the French were not sharing publicly their, I think, some of the maybe level of detail that you're seeing here in this. But no, I mean, you can tell. I mean, they were. I will say it was interesting seeing the level of preparedness in closing their embassy. You know, we were kind of, I'm sure you were going through similar things. We were kind of trying to go through very similar, having very similar discussions with our staff about, you know, the positives and negatives of coming to the United States as a refugee. You know, how difficult that can be if you don't have the language skills. That really took me back, but you know, and I think everyone at that time was wishing that they had started having those difficult conversations earlier, and had, you know, gotten people out, because yeah, we didn't, you know, our whole staff had to leave on after the fall of Kabul. We didn't preemptively start to scale back.
Yeah, jump in.
I kind of tend to disagree with that the French embassy was really doing. Because in late May, the Australian embassy was closed. So Australia closed their embassy in Kabul like 2 months, more than 2 months before the fall of the city. But I'm not sure whether they evacuated their colleagues or not. That is another question. But also in April, because at that time, I reported for Afghanistan Analyst Network, the post-departure Afghanistan. That was the title of the report. And we also saw at that time the American embassy announced in April that they were accelerating their SIV for their colleagues and those who work with the American troops in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And a similar program was implemented by the British embassy in Afghanistan, and they had already moved many of their staff out of Kabul.
And where does Afghanistan? We're going to come to the audience for some questions, maybe after this question. Where does Afghanistan go from now? It seems like the news we hear, if there is any, involves, you know, Western European governments worried about the far right, trying to send people home, and thereby exceptionally talking to the Taliban, and that's about it. There's not a lot of news coverage or diplomatic cooperation with Afghanistan. How does the country, this is a long question, get back onto that path of, you know, democratization and a future where girls can go to school? Is there any hope of that?
Well, I think, first of all, we should look at the imperatives that somehow motivated us to try democratization in Afghanistan during the US-led intervention in Afghanistan. I think there were three major reasons or imperatives. One was that the international relations, the US had engaged in democratization or democracy promotion as part of their strategic understanding that if other countries or states or democracies, then it would help them achieve their security. And the second one was, like, at the individual state level, the US felt that there was kind of, they had a kind of moral obligation to leave something better after liberating Afghanistan from what they call primitive dictatorship of the Taliban. And this is really well captured in President Bush's memoir, Decision Points, where he says that Afghanistan was the ultimate nation building because we had liberated Afghanistan, we had to leave something better. It was our moral obligation. And he also says that it was our strategic understanding, like that a democratic Afghanistan would be a hopeful alternative to the visions of the extremists. Mm-hmm. So, and the third reason or imperative was like Afghanistan had emerged out of the civil war and the Taliban's reign of terror. So scholars, they argue that out of available tools or solutions for a post-conflict country, democracy is risky, but it is the more durable solution. And of course, we don't have the two fast imperatives, which is the US moral obligation or the US strategic understanding to leave something better in Afghanistan. But one problem is that after the fall of Kabul or after the Taliban takeover, there is an understanding that it is over for Afghanistan. But I think...
Is that your feeling now?
I mean the conflict, the stability, the question of stability in Afghanistan is still there. So Afghanistan is an ethnically diverse country and deeply divided. So if we want to find a solution, so we still need to have a democratic arrangement for that country.
Maybe come to you, Susannah. Is there reason to hope? And if not, what are the conditions to have that hope coming from the outsider?
Well, if you look at the trend lines of Taliban rule, they're not moving toward loosening of any of the restrictions, not only on women, but general social restrictions on society, their control of public life. Something that, as in our coverage of Afghanistan, that we're always looking for is what is the cohesion within the Taliban? Are there clashes? Are there disagreements between Kandahar and Kabul? Now that the Taliban is completely in control of this large country with a lot of urban centers, places where they didn't have control before, is this going to present them as an organization with problems that maybe they don't have the skills to address, like social media usage among their fighters? That was another reason that they cut the internet off for a few days last year. There was something that they were trying to control the way that their fighters, use smartphones. And so, I think that's one of our questions, and that's probably something that we're looking a bit more closely when we're thinking about the future of Afghanistan. But I think as things stand now, I think I don't see, movement in the more kind of liberal democratization direction that we consider here.
Okay, thank you. This is our first screening. I'm not sure if there's a roaming microphone for questions. Is there one? Oh, good. So I might just ask you to, address questions to our panelists generally, or a particular one. Who would like to go first? I can't see very. Is that?
Thank you. I'm
Scott?
Scott Worden. Great to see both Ali and Susannah again.
Can you tell us who you have an impressive background? Can you be immodest for a moment?
Formerly ran the Afghanistan program for USIP and also worked on Afghan elections for the UN. I spent a lot of time, and many of us in this town have spent a lot of time looking at lessons learned from a U.S. perspective, U.S. policy. How did we get it wrong? What can we do better if there's the next time? I'm curious to what extent do each of you, either Susannah through your reporting, Ali through your conversations with friends in the region, what are the lessons that the withdrawal, the abrupt withdrawal, referred to often as a betrayal, have for the region? And I ask that seeing a profound coincidence in watching this movie tonight, as we are encouraging Iranians to stand up against the regime for democracy. And so I'm curious whether you've had conversations or talk about what the region has taken away and where the level of trust is of the U.S. for supporting the kinds of efforts that we did in Afghanistan before we left.
Thank you. Nice question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have a full answer to it, but I think one thing that that I think is important, and especially after just seeing those images of the chaotic withdrawal, like those images of the chaotic withdrawal had a profound impact on how the world views the United States. And I know it became this kind of political talking point here in DC, and some people were trying to dismiss it because it was being used maybe unfairly to attack one party or one group of people here. But regardless of all of that, that was a really big deal, and I think that those kinds of images and the messages that they send are really important to if the United States ever wants to kind of do anything else, maybe support the Iranian people. The United States' ability to do those things is impacted by past decisions and how they were carried out, like the Afghanistan withdrawal. I don't know if I can think of one lesson or big takeaway, but I do think that looking at the U.S.'s involvement in Afghanistan and the amount of corruption and how that really kind of poisoned everything and how that changed the way, the corruption in one U.S. project changed the way the entire U.S. Involvement in Afghanistan was viewed, and how kind of viscerally that turned people against the U.S. presence there. I mean, when we were reporting on why people supported the Taliban in the first place, it always came back to corruption. That was because people were just disgusted by what they were seeing in Kabul and in the different urban centers where there was support for the U.S.-backed government. So, I mean, I think that those are two things that I think about a lot.
Ali?
I think great to see you, Scott. I think that is a very tough question, but from where I see Afghans on social media and from my conversation with friends, we really do not have a unified view of the U.S. involvement in possibly in Iran. There is sort of polarity. Some people who oppose like this extra-regional intervention in the region, they usually refer to the case of Afghanistan, and they say how the U.S. really facilitated the return of the Taliban by dealing with the Taliban in Doha in Qatar. And but I think some other people really see the nuance. They also think that the 20 years of intervention in Afghanistan also created a lot of opportunity for Afghans. Many women got educated, and we really saw a new generation of Afghan people who are very educated, and they and also the girls, they organized the resistance against the Taliban in the immediate aftermath of the Taliban takeover of Kabul, and they say that it was because of 20 years of opportunity. If the U.S. had not intervened in Afghanistan, we would not have had those opportunities, and the women and girls would have continued to remain deprived of education under the previous Taliban regime as they are now under the current regime. And I think they see some kind of nuance in this, and now they see if the suppression in Iran continues, then it deprives the people of the opportunity that they could have to flourish.
Thank you. Would there be any NYU students in the room? Any students? Would you have a question? I'm just being very discriminatory. Can we ask, what would you like to ask as a question?
You said, do do we have any NYU students? Yeah, I came from
that's not
NYU,
you.
New York.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just came for this screening, and it was I was surprised that the first session of this series was about Afghanistan, and it was called Kabul Chaos. And I was so curious to come and see, although I'm not a political science major, but I was really intrigued by it. The movie, I missed earlier parts of it because of the delay in my train, but I liked it. It did capture some of the realities, but I'm assuming for privacy purposes, maybe there were parts that we could not include in the movies, or maybe that were not captured. And it's also, there is a balance. You have to balance the part of the personal experiences of people and also the overall, like, zoomed out view of the country and its relation to what was happening around the globe at that time. I got really emotional when I saw those scenes where my country was falling down. I was there. I'm one of the living examples of, like, when the Taliban took over, I was there. My university got banned. I have a sister back home, she can't go to school. But yes, as Mr. Adili said, that the intervention did open doors for girls, at least for the 20 years. Now we have that ability to say something. If that intervention wasn't there, I wouldn't be able to speak English here and be here at NYU and represent those girls. So although there is like a nuance, some people have that idea that maybe keep the Western intervention away, or like not have the Western countries or foreign countries involved in those situations. But I think I'm more so on the side of that involvement. It has its nuances, but in terms of opening opportunities and doors for people, I think that's where I would stand. And if today we have girls who can resist, who can create those underground opportunities to continue education, we have girls and even male students who made it out of Afghanistan and studying at prestigious universities in the United States, representing their people. That's I think, a testament to the intervention. That, like, this is the result of it. It's not a huge thing, but it is something. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That wasn't
Thank
a
you.
question, but I want to say, exactly. Thank you for sharing that and for coming tonight all the way from New York.
Amazing.
Who else would like to ask something?
Hi, I just wanted to make a quick comment, but yes, it is emotional to see clips like this all the time. But putting the emotions aside, there was one angle to what could have happened to Afghanistan, and I believe former President Hamid Karzai did hint out that peace, that we're looking for peace. A lot of corruption, a lot of fightings, explosions happening for the last 20 years in the country. So I personally believe that international community, French embassy, French president, former President Hamid Karzai, Khalil Zad, who signed the deal with Taliban, the Doha, even the Taliban, and even slightly a bit the Republican or the democracy in Afghanistan, they all believed that we could have had a best case scenario where there would have been a beautiful, prosperous Afghanistan, peace. Taliban could co-live with the Afghan government.
Mm-hmm.
girls could go to school, you know, healthcare to women and all. So that could have been the best case scenario, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And US failed to implement that project, which to me it was basically landing a rocket back, which US couldn't. But hopefully in any of the next projects could be the Iran, if they want to basically include themselves in Iran, they could land the rocket back on its place. Thank you.
You want to comment on the comment?
I mean, I think one of the reasons why the Doha Agreement had the form that it had was that there wasn't really a way, or at least the way that the negotiators were dealing with the issue of Taliban and U.S.-backed forces cohabitating. There weren't really avenues toward that end state. It didn't seem.
I think that was the question all the time, that were we ready for a peace at any cost? And when President Karzai says we are ready with little things lost, I think this is not little things. Since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, I'm not really, unfortunately or fortunately, a women's rights activist or even human rights activist, but human rights organizations, they have been using the term gender apartheid to describe the Taliban's treatment of women. So it's not little things that President Karzai says in that in his interaction with the French ambassador. So that is one thing. And the second thing, why not? So if we could have had some better scenario, why we did not go for it? For example, why the Afghan government was not involved in, of course, the Doha deal was negotiated by Ambassador Khalilzad, and to be honest, if you look at his performance in Afghanistan for 20 years, and it also relates to the question Scott asked earlier, that what lessons could be drawn. For example, he made sure that Afghanistan adopted a presidential system. And this was a very centralized presidential system in Afghanistan. And of course, the corruption that Susannah mentioned was there, but this corruption was only the natural outcome of such a centralized system in Afghanistan, because it somehow facilitated the country's slide into new patrimonialism, which is like the informal relations or sort of dysfunctional form of hybrid governance in Afghanistan. And in order to show your loyalty, those who are managing the elections, they perpetrated fraud in Afghanistan. And also, Khalilzad made sure that Afghanistan adopted, for example, SNTV, single non-transferable vote for the elections in Afghanistan. And we know that for a post-conflict country, the institutions are very important. And the way the institutions were designed, they really paved the way for all of this.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Maybe if you could, just tell us who you are and ask a question.
Hello.
Does this gentleman, are you ready to go?
I'm allowed. My name is Susannah George. Thank you for this event, and I'm very happy to see Ali Yawar Adili, my classmate from Kabul time. Following the withdrawal of the United States and, from Afghanistan, I became very skeptical about the foreign intervention in different countries. There is a counter argument about what Adili mentioned about the 20 years progress made possible by the US intervention. There is also counter argument saying that if the US or the Western blocs had not intervened in Afghanistan decades ago, mobilized the whole society against the Soviet Union invasion in Afghanistan, we would not have had Mujahideen, and as a consequence of Mujahideen, we would not have had the Taliban. So many say that the Taliban is even the product of the US intervention in Afghanistan. So I am curious to know what Adili or the panel members' response to this question.
Yeah.
Great to see you, Hussein. I don't disagree with that Mujahideen and the Taliban are like came out of the U.S. Cold War intervention in Afghanistan and supporting Mujahideen against the Soviet occupation. That's something like a fact. And after Mujahideen could not agree on the form of a state in Afghanistan in early 1990s, and there was civil war and there were like corruptions and killings. So the Taliban emerged from Kandahar. And of course, again, there is like the Taliban were supported also by Pakistan, and there was also this intervention. So like they were used as a proxy against other groups in Afghanistan. So I think that may not negate the fact that the 20 years of intervention in Afghanistan provided an opportunity after the Taliban were in power in 1996 until 2001. And they deprived women of education, and they they banned women from public life. If the U.S. had not intervened in Afghanistan, that situation would have probably continued for many more years. So there are many counterfactual arguments, but I think we cannot buy into one or another. Yes, Mujahideen was a byproduct of the U.S. support for Mujahideen against the Soviets during the Cold War, but the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan for 20 years also created opportunities, also not for women and girls, but also for minorities, including like the Hazaras, who for the first time had this access to education and other opportunities.
Can I just jump to the last question? I realize I wasn't looking at my watch. We've promised to let you go 10 to 9, I think. So who would have the last question?
Hi, Ori Salties. I teach at Georgetown. Speculation again, kind of follow up on the last two comments/questions. We saw George Bush on screen. Some of us are old enough to remember his proud claim that we had accomplished our mission of presumed revenge because of 9/11 by going into Afghanistan. With remarkable alacrity, we seemed to accomplish our task, and with equal alacrity, we left Afghanistan, forgot about it, pivoted towards Iraq, a catastrophe that also appeared on the screen because the mention of ISIS, of course, brings up something that wouldn't perhaps have existed had we not done what we did there. This is my question. Do you think, and there may be no answer, had instead of that pivot, we had remained, whatever that verb means, in Afghanistan in some capacity, that the effect we would have had could have been better than in the end it was, and not something with a lifespan of 20 years that ended back where it began, with the Taliban in power again? Just your thoughts.
Question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, that's something that you hear, that the U.S. took their eye off the ball, that they stretched their military too thin. But just when you look at all of all of the reasons why that the U.S. Intervention in Afghanistan wasn't working toward the end. It was more than just allocation of military resources. There were
just military resources.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about military resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, and I mean, and you can kind of try to spin the clock back and work through lots of different scenarios, but yeah, I don't have an answer for you on that one. I'm sorry.
Ali?
I think I also don't have a clear answer, but I think yes, all this. Earlier I mentioned the three administrations, and I think I missed President Bush administration that he really diverted the attention to Iraq, and there was low input, military input or civilian input in Afghanistan. And there are studies across the intervention in different countries that show that where there is low input of civilian and military resources, and the path to political development and democratization is really not smooth, and we have like a low output of political development and economic recovery. And at the time, Afghanistan needed the most like the civilian and military input. It was diverted to Iraq. And then I also agree that if there had been a different kind of shift or pivot from Afghanistan in Iraq to like from the global, so-called global war on terror to America's Asia Century, which is the title of Secretary Clinton's article in 2011, and where she says that we pivot to Asia Pacific. So I think there could have been different results. At least, for example, President Obama could have announced the troop surge without having tying it like to time or making it time-bound troop surge. It could have been like condition-based troop surge.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I suppose if we have questions about what the past means and what the future might bring us, the documentary has done its job. I'd like to thank you all for coming to this inaugural screening, and especially our guests, Ali and Susannah, and particularly all of the audience, but the Afghan members who came. Thank you very much.